if I'm being honest, I'm gonna say something very controversial. If it was my money, honestly, I'm surprised to say that I'd probably go with the... Let's say you have around $30,000 and you want a true driver's sports car. You want a low center of gravity boxer engine. Should you go with the 2024 Subaru BRZ Premium or the 2006 Porsche Cayman S? This is the 987.1 generation. Now these two cars on paper are actually far more similar than you would expect, because even though this Cayman S had an MSRP when adjusted for inflation is about 3 times the price of this BRZ, nowadays they're both around $30,000 plus or minus a little bit on the used market. Of course, the BRZ being far newer is going to have different tech, your CarPlay, etc. But the Porsche is, I mean, it's a Porsche. The BRZ is powered by a 2.4 liter naturally aspirated flat 4, that's the FA24 engine, making 228 horsepower, 184 pound-feet of torque, but it is underrated from factory because it's putting 215 horsepower to the wheels. 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds. It weighs a little bit over 2,800 pounds. We have strut front, multi-link rear with electric power steering, and a Torsen LSD comes standard. Now, in terms of mods, you guys may have seen this car on the channel before. We have a Corsa Performance Sport exhaust and also the STI Flexible V-Bars, which actually helps to increase rigidity at corner entry, but softens the ride when you're just driving straight. Several other mods that are more aesthetic, which you can find down in the description. Now, the Porsche Cayman, on the other hand, is powered by a 3.4 liter flat 6 that's also naturally aspirated. This is the M97 engine, making 295 horsepower, 251 pound-feet of torque. So it is quite a bit up on power. And I will admit that the base came in with the 2.7 liter, making 245 horsepower, and also with longer gearing. It's probably a more fair comparison, but this is what we have today. 0 to 60, 4.8 seconds. It is a bit heavier, a little bit over 2,900 pounds, 2,950. Strut front and strut rear suspension, hydraulic steering, and there is no LSD standard, which is really interesting, but we'll see how much that actually changes the driving experience. Mods here, we have a larger throttle body and plenum, circuit works header and exhaust system, H&R lowering springs, 993 turbo speedline replica wheels, and PS4S rubber, 235 in the front, 265 in the rear. Although we do have a mismatch on the front driver's side due to a nail. We're running General GMax, but also in the 235. We're actually going to start with the BRZ, because as you guys know, I owned a GR86 for 1.5 years, and before that I had a FRS for 9 years. The interior of the BRZ is pretty purposeful, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Some people have complained, more so for the first gen FRS and BRZ rather than the second gen, that the interior wasn't, you know, up to par, but I actually think it's actually quite excellent. I think you have a nice boxer-inspired gauge cluster. It's fully digital. You can change that based on your drive modes. Wireless Apple CarPlay. The gauges and the buttons here for HVAC and controls are a lot better than the first gen. Seating position is also quite good, although if you are a taller driver, keep in mind that you're probably going to have the steering wheel pretty far away from you. This is built for a smaller body type. This new FA24 engine is such a welcome change to the FA20 from its predecessor, because that engine was a little bit overrated from factory. The car was slightly lighter by less than 100 pounds, but that engine only made around 160 to the wheels. This is now at 215. Not the most sonorous engine, but we have the D4S fuel injection and port injection system from Toyota, which gives you the advantages of port injection at the lower RPMs, cleaning those valves and such, and then at the higher RPMs you get that additional power and efficiency by switching over to direct. And I still feel that this car, the BRZ and the GR86, which are obviously more similar than different, this having slightly different rear suspension, softer spring rates, a bit more comfortable, not quite as oversteer prone, this is probably the most fun car you're going to have for about $30,000. It is stupid good value. You have great inputs, great chassis balance. If you are going to start tracking the vehicle, yes, you will run into the issues of a lot of understeer at the front. You're going to have to do your camber bolts and maybe even control arms. And of course, you have to be afraid of the right-handers with sustained G-forces with the FA24 engine, unfortunately, which is part of the reason I got spooked and got out of my GR86. We have a revised steering rack from the first gen, and honestly, I prefer the first gen. It had a heavier weighting, more feedback, didn't feel as artificially quick with the steering ratio, but this isn't bad and you can get used to it. However, right off center, there's a bit of this like stickiness, this inconsistent weighting where it's light and then it kind of builds just a couple degrees off. Put this into track mode. The gauge display changes. Oh, it's even the BRZ is playful. The GR6 more so. We're getting just a little hint. That suggestion of rotation at the rear. This thing just wants to dance, man. It is a dance partner. It is a dog, a happy dog wagging its tail. It is a car that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's all about the smiles of the driver behind the wheel, maximizing your smiles per gallon. Wow, even there, partial throttle over the crest, getting a little bit light. And again, that suggestion of oversteer. Such a communicative little car, even though the steering is quite a bit more numb than the prior generation, not giving me as much of that road texture, that load up mid-corner. The chassis itself transmits a lot through the seat. You can feel exactly what's happening. It's a lightweight, taut little sports car. It's actually higher chassis rigidity than the first generation. The transmission has these medium throws, slightly on the longer side, but very clean delineation between gates. Not quite as heavy and slick, a little bit lighter and notchier. Not quite as satisfying as, let's say, an ND Miata. But you're not going to have any issues misshifting. Pedal box as well. You have a very gradual and linear brake pedal. Not a ton of bite. These are OEM pads. That's expected. The actual throttle mapping, though, is a little bit binary, and I think part of the reason they've done that is to make it feel more sporty. So you have very aggressive throttle tip-in. So with a little bit of throttle, you get a lot of engine response. And let's give you a pull. That additional power is so welcome. Revs out a little bit over 7,000 RPM. Not the smoothest engine. It does get a little bit rough, but that additional torque down low as well is such a huge welcome change from the prior gen. I really, really love these cars. I think that they've tuned them in such a brilliant way. 101-inch wheelbase gives you that stability and that progressive nature as you do lose the tail. It's a very easy car to learn in how to manage oversteer and understeer and dance with the car at the limit. The only thing you really have to be mindful of is that you're not going to quite have the same level of communication versus the prior gen. And if I'm being honest, I'm going to say something very controversial. I actually prefer the prior generation FRS and BRZ in terms of just fun to drive factor, because you got more communication, more rawness, more steering feel, and just based on my, I guess, preferences in terms of how I want a car to drive, I very much value steering feel, which is why out of the 3 cars I own, the Mazda CX-50, especially from the 2023 model year, not so much the 24 and onward, Lotus Emira, and the ND3 Miata, all 3 of them have phenomenal steering. But that's just based on my own quirks, right? And other people may not care as much about that. And the engine, I think, for most people is going to be a bigger deal breaker with the first gen. But I was willing to overlook that for the other things that I loved about that car. Also, the suspension tuning in my 2013 FRS was pretty poor. The ride quality was highly compromised. And here they've done things right, where it's far more comfortable, better quality damping. get to the corners, that's when these cars come alive.
Beautiful. Suspension is a little bit soft, so it takes a moment to set. You can feel it kind of wiggle around, but the fundamentals are so spot on. Make a car that's around 2,800 pounds, sub 3,000 pounds, give it a very low center of gravity thanks to that boxer engine and just their focus on engineering it with a very low center of gravity. Have good inputs, front engine, rear wheel drive, give it a limited slip differential, towards it in the rear. And I mean, how are you not gonna have fun? With that as the benchmark, let's see how the 987.1 compares. The 987.1 interior does feel its age, right? This is a 2-decade-old interior. But if you are a taller driver, it's actually a little bit easier to get into an optimal position because the shifter doesn't feel too far away, and I'm not fully stretching out my arms with this. It's not quite as good as the modern Porsches, but I am more comfortable here in terms of seating position than in the BRZ. This example has 50,000 miles, and I mean, the touch points are all pretty solid, no creaks and rattles just yet. That's what you get with Porsche build quality. All right, a proper Porsche flat six with that glorious howl, a much smoother engine than in the BRZ, the M97 feeling far more special than the FA24, both having their own issues. Of course, with that, it's the oil starvation on right-hand corners, and on this, it's the IMS bearings and the bore scoring, which is why if you want to get a 987, many people would tell you to get the 987.2 instead of the .1 with the updated 9A1 engine that doesn't have those issues anymore. That one also has direct injection, whereas this is only port injection. And the other thing is, man, do I miss hydraulic steering, because we have far more weight here. It's not overly fast of a ratio, so the front end doesn't feel artificially boosted and darty. Far more natural, getting substantially more feedback through the wheel. Now keep in mind, amongst hydraulic racks, I don't think the 987 actually has a super feelsome rack, but you do get far more road texture communication. You can understand what's happening at the front end simply through the wheel compared to that BRZ. Now the owner Michael did swap out the shifter here for a 997 GT3 shifter, which I do think is a step up compared to the 987.1 stock shifter, which has a little bit too much of a long throw and a lot of tilting to the shift lever. But this one might be a little bit better, but I mean, look at this level of lateral slop. And between gates, you're not having a very high level of crispness. I actually prefer the shifter in the BRZ. A little bit easier to use. You don't have to think about it as much, whereas here you're kind of worried you're going to miss-shift it. Quite long gears, even in the Cayman S. We have these pedal spacers as well, which are not giving me too much of an issue. Normally I over blip with pedal spacers. I prefer no pedal spacers personally. No LSD at the rear, but because we have the engine, that mid-engine balance, it puts the power down without any issue. And it's willing to get the tail out, traction kicking in there. For the most part, the way that this car feels though is far less playful and far more serious. I'm not gonna say clinical, because I think with the mods that the owner Michael has done, it doesn't feel quite as dry and sterile as some other Cayman examples. This still has a little bit of theater. The engine is very far forward. You have that beautiful Porsche howl. But the way that this car encourages you to drive is very different than the BRZ. Whereas the BRZ is the dog wagging its tail and wanting to play and wanting to dance. This thing is more about getting the job done in a very German way, a very precise way, if you will. And while this will step out on you if you want it to, like we were experimenting with back there, the BRZ is constantly encouraging you with very little effort. Like, even at half throttle, it wants to dance and play. Whereas this car, it's a very different experience. That mid-engine balance as well, because it has a lot of the weight behind you and not in the front. The front end feels quite light. It feels easier to point. The culture of the creators here, of the Germans, wanting to go around the corner in the most precise and quick way. Do it with balance, do it with stability, do it with poise, without that silly childishness of the BRZ. Give you a pull. Both this and the BRZ are going to rev out to around 7,500 RPM, but one of these engines feels far more special than the other. And keep in mind, this is the S, right? So you have that additional displacement over the base Cayman. That additional power does feel welcome. The power to weight ratio in this is superior than in the BRZ, even though the BRZ is a little bit lighter. It's only about 100 pounds, maybe 130 pounds-ish. Now the NVH and the ride quality here isn't quite as good as the BRZ. If you want a car that is daily driver friendly, you get the added tech features in the BRZ, the wireless Apple CarPlay. It's not nearly as loud. I mean, that car already is a sports car that is pretty loud on the interior, definitely a lot quieter than the first gen that I owned. But the suspension there is more supple, more compliant, and doesn't have the same level of harshness that this Cayman does. Now keep in mind, this has H&R lowering springs, and I have yet to drive any car that does not have significantly compromised ride quality because of lowering springs. But there is something about the Cayman that the BRZ just misses, which is the quality of the inputs. The steering here is actually one of the best hydraulic racks I've felt in a 987 Cayman. I'm getting a good amount of feedback. Again, not the most, but amongst 987 Caymans, it is actually quite strong and definitely a lot better than the BRZ. And it's not just the quality of the feedback and the communication through the wheel, but also the speed of the ratio. It's not artificial. It feels more natural, more one-to-one. Let's turn this off so we can play a little bit. Quite intrusive. I wish there was a middle setting. There it goes, wiggling a little bit. The body control here, given the ride quality, is actually not that great. You would expect the car to have better body control given how firm the ride is. But going back to the inputs,
I love the steering here. It is so much better than the BRZ. I don't love the transmission. The transmission in the BRZ is quite better, even though this is better than a stock 987.1 Cayman. There's just a little bit too much slop and not enough crispness between gates, but I would say it's an upgrade. Now, even the pedal box, you have, older car has longer throws. The clutch, far longer throw, but better clutch feel. The brake pedal, it doesn't quite have the same level of initial grab as that BRZ. Not that the BRZ is very grabby, but this is an older car, so you have a little bit more of that gradual build on the brake pedal. You need to put another inch or two before it really starts slowing down. But the throttle here is also far more natural. It doesn't have that aggressive tip-in. And there's one thing that, back when I was doing plastic surgery in the OR, we would always obsess over ergonomics, because you're spending hours and hours working with your hands standing up and wanting to optimize what you're doing, what output you're getting based on the input you give your various tools, right? And I think Porsche has always nailed that, even more so in more recent models. But even back in 2006, the quality of the inputs here are quite one-to-one. And that's so impressive, because this car is 2 decades old, and the BRZ has certain strengths over the Cayman, right? I think it's far more playful. If you want to just get the tail out everywhere you go and kick it sideways, that's the car you should go for. Or actually, it's twin the GR86, which is even more tail happy, and I think looks better too on the front bumper, on the styling department. What's that guy doing? Come on, people, pay attention, get off your phone. But the issue I had with the BRZ is the same issue I had with my GR86, and it's actually the quality of the inputs. Going from my FRS, which I loved and I kept for 9.5 years, to my GR86, I didn't drive my GR86 as much as I thought I would, because the steering was just off, the throttle tip-in wasn't fully natural, the seating position I couldn't quite get as comfortable as I would like, and that tends to bother me more than maybe the average driver. And because of that, if it was my money, honestly, I'm surprised to say that I'd probably go with the Cayman. Even though it does take itself quite a bit more seriously, I like cars that are more playful and that dance with you. The quality of the inputs, the engine, I think the overall package, it feels far more special. If you want to go daily driver, I'd say go with the newer GR86 or BRZ. But if you want a more special occasion every time you get behind the wheel, I think you have to go with the 987.1 Cayman S. My friends, let me know what you think with a comment down below. Much love, and I'll see you all in that next one.